It is now 11 a.m. We are going to begin our second virtual North American Student Congress. I want to welcome all of our speakers and everyone who is tuning in from around the continent, Canada, North America, US, and Mexico. We have an excellent group of speakers, and this is going to be a wonderful dialogue of discovery. Allow me to begin by introducing Olympia Ramirez. Olympia, are you on the call? Let's see if she comes on. Is Gladiola on the call yet? Yeah, they're coming from Mexico, so they may have a little trouble getting in. How about Lilia? Is Lilia on the call? Lilia Curley? Okay, well, we can begin our session with Pedro Gil Gonzalez. He attends the Universidad Panamericana. He's going to be talking to us about a Mexican classical traditional perspective of historiography and the pursuit of shared values.
Okay. Yes.
So, Pedro, we're so
yeah.
eager to hear your perspective.
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, I would like to say thank you to everyone here, especially to you, Mr. Wills, for making this Congress possible. I think it's really interesting to hear all the opinions and perspectives of people from all North America in this really interesting topic. Just give me a minute to share my screen. Okay, you can see it, right?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the general topic of this Congress, that is about nationalism, patriotism, and solidarity. Before I start, I want to apologize in advance because one of the most interesting thing about this Congress is the language barrier. So I really appreciate your comprehension if I make mistakes in the pronunciation of certain words, but also it's also a good way to try to develop empathy to all of us neighbors in this region of the world, because sometimes we forget that in Mexico we speak Spanish, and in the United States and in Canada, English. So sometimes even with all the technology, there are still a lot of misunderstandings. So sorry in advance. Before answering the question, I wanted to put this image of a mirror, because a mirror is a really symbolic image in the history of philosophy and human thinking, because it shows a lot of the reflection of us, but also it's a very interesting way of abstraction, because when we see the reflection in a mirror, the first thing we see is our physical characteristics, right? But then after that, humans could abstract the image and start developing more profound answers of what we see. So in order to respond the main question about how a Mexican with a Western traditional education see nationalist patriotism and solidarity, I wanted to talk about the eternal question of who we are.
Hold on a minute, Pedro. I just wanted to ask everybody to please turn off their screens and their mics so we can see this presentation big. And we will pull you up when, okay, at your time, we'll call you. If you could just turn off your, that's it. So has everybody turned off their, so does that allow us to see? Very good. Go ahead, Pedro.
Thank you. So we have here the eternal question of who are you? It's very famous that in ancient Greek, there was the temple of Delphi that said, know thyself and you will know the universe and the gods. So in a way, everyone is called to pursue wisdom. If you want to know a little bit of my personal background, I was born in a city called Villahermosa. It's the capital of the state of Tabasco in Mexico, on the southeast region of the country, near the Yucatan Peninsula and in the border with Guatemala. I want to talk about a little bit about the history of my city. Tabasco has played a pivotal role in Mexican history, serving as the cradle of the Olmec civilization and the site of crucial 16th century Spanish conquest and a hub for oil production. It is known for early resistance against foreign invaders, including the French and the United States, and served as a laboratory of revolution in the 1920s. This term laboratory of revolution is because during that time, Mexico, there was a very interesting period of ideology, very related with the socialism. So in the city where I live, it had a big impact. If we see my state in a chronological order, at the beginning, it was the Olmecs, that is considered the mother culture of the pre-Hispanic civilizations. Then when Hernán Cortés arrived here in Mexico, it was through my villa. And it's really famous that she fell in love with a native woman called La Malinche, who served him as the translator because she could speak different native languages. Then in the 1920s, as I was mentioning, here was supposed to be the laboratory of revolution because a political leader called Tomás Garrido developed a program according to his policy, and if often compared with the Yucatan, because in Yucatan also happened the same. Also, the different moments that Tabasco served as resistance for foreign invasions. And then in the last century, Tabasco become really famous because it has a lot of petrol, oil, and nowadays we have a big industry that is called Pemex. It's Petróleos Mexicanos. And finally, it's also the place where was born the president of Mexico, the last president, Andrés Manuel López Obrador. Now, after talking about my background and the history of my hometown, I want to give my opinion about what nationalism, patriotism, and solidarity means to Mexican citizens formed in a classical traditional Western educational framework. Let's try to comprehend the question word by word. What I decided to do was to put here the general definitions of the concepts. First of all, nationalism is an ideology that elevates one nation or nationality above all others, and that places primary emphasis on promotion of its culture and interests as opposed to those of other nations, nationalities, or supranational groups. Then we have the concept of patriotism, that is the love for or devotions to one's country. And here is the really interesting concept that is solidarity. First, you can see the concept as the unity as of a group or class that produce or is based on community of interest, objectives, and standards. But also we have this definition that I found on the webpage of this Congress, that according to Dr. Michael Pekaluk, it is treating others equally to us with dignity and respect, and with the development of this habit became the virtue of solidarity. I also wanted to investigate a little more about what's a classical traditional Western education. Here you can read some main ideas of what it is, but in general is the classic education most of us receive in our schools. And it's based on the Greek classic idea of human virtue, and also in the idea of Socrates, of dialogue, and how with the conversation and ideas that everyone could apport, we can create really good conclusions and the development of human race. Finally, answering the question, as a Mexican, I have this conclusion. I believe that also the terms nationalism, patriotism, and solidarity are closely related because they revolve around a human community. The way in which they are implemented is very different. At some point in my life, when I was a teenager and trying to answer the question of who I was, I came to identify myself above all as Mexican, since I had such a deep-rooted love for my land. And also, I doubted many things. I didn't doubt where I was born and the sense of duty that my community deserved. However, as I grew up, educating myself, and also with the opportunity to study in other countries like Canada or Italy, I began not only to admire and respect other nations, but also to identify myself as part of them. This was because I no longer focus solely on the material values of each country, but also on the human values of my classmates and friends that I had acquired over time. They became we. I also think that we all need the passage of years or to live some experiences to see beyond what we know, and very importantly, to know how to communicate, even with language barriers, as in this precise moment here, in order to generate empathy and defend not one's own country, but our world that belongs to everyone. Sorry. It is important to remember who we are, where we come from, and what our origins are, but also to understand that human history is one of transformations. Everyone has something to offer, and communication is key. I hope we can learn together. Thank you.
Pedro, I mean, if you compared your English to my Spanish, okay, you would get a 10 and I would get a 4. All right. So I
Thank you.
think everybody is very impressed with this. Was a very deep presentation. Now we're going to have 3 minutes for questions. So if you want to make a question, please feel free to begin. Who would
Thank
like
you.
to ask a question of Pedro?
I can go ahead and
Olivia?
ask a question. Yeah. Thank you so much, Pedro, for your presentation. That was super insightful. I'm kind of wondering if you could like elaborate a little bit more on how you see these three virtues manifest in Mexico specifically, and maybe what about your country kind of changes how these virtues work.
Thank you, Olivia. Well, first of all, I want to use the concept of virtue of Aristotle. According to him, the main virtue was to try to develop the equilibrium, the prudence. So I think in Mexico, we always have been in the middle of so many things. Even if we see as a historic fact, when the Spaniards arrived, uh, Mexico inhabitants were the combination of many different indigenous groups. There has never been one group. So if we wanted or we didn't want it, we needed to adapt to live in the prudence, trying to see what one indigenous group have to offer, what the Spaniard have to offer. And I think that make our own way of being. So I think that's a virtue in my opinion. And nowadays, many people are trying to um, say that this is the right path, but I think Mexicans, we always have done it this way.
That was a very good question and answer. And thank you, Olivia. And we'll hear from her a little bit. She attends Yale University. Any other questions in this time period? Any other questions for Pedro? Very good. Pedro, I'm going to ask you a question. How do you see this there's a ton of influence, as you know, as you're growing up, of American consumerism, as this last slide slightly shows, all right, at least in the middle. What can you say is your personal reaction as a young man growing up and then a person who became exposed to international experiences, but first as a young man?
Oh, thank you for the question. I think in a way, it's a very personal question because there's no one single answer. Because I think also answering this question, being Mexican, I didn't want to fall in this stereotype because we are, I don't know, 200 million people that is considered Mexican. So I'm going to give you my own personal opinion of what have I've experienced myself. So I think it has been an asset, the influence of the American or any other country, because I have decided to take the good. I think it's impossible to resist of the pressure or of the influence of any country nowadays, because we are always receiving information, we are always receiving the offer of the commerce that they want to sell us, you know. But I think we need to have the final decision of what to take and what not to take. So I think, for example, using the example of the United States, uh, they have sent us a lot of good things. I think, for example, the not just products, but also some standards of what we consider human rights and dignity. So I think it's a good thing, and I hope Mexico also have to give something back to the world, hopefully.
Does anybody else want to follow along that line of questioning of foreign influence? And so, Pedro, would you then, seems to me that you are exercising prudence as far as discerning what things you could want from America, I mean United States, and what things you don't want. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. That's the right concepts, prudence and discerning. Yeah. And also uh, critics thought pensamiento crítico, when you need to be really critic and think before making a decision. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, with that, we're going to go to our first speaker. Thank you, Pedro. We're going to go to our first speaker, Olympia Ramirez, who is going to speak about the indigenous perspective of a student living in Mexico. What do these three topics mean in your personal, community, and historical context? And Olympia is a student also at the Universidad Panamericana in Mexico City. Thank you, Olympia.
Thank you. Let me present. Let me. Give me a minute, please. I have a presentation, but I have many problems with my presentation, so give me a minute. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. My name is Bella Olimpia Ramirez. I am a philosophy student at the Universidad Panamericana, and this is my contribution from an ancestral perspective in Mexico. Okay? Okay. To answer the question of what nationalism, patriotism, and solidarity mean to me as an indigenous student in Mexico, I first have to explain what it means to be a Nahua indigenous. Okay? This is Mexico. In the first image, we have Mexico. Then we have the state of Veracruz. And then we have a little point in the state of Veracruz, who is named the Huasteca, the region of Huasteca. Okay? I identify as a Nahua indigenous because, like my parents, my grandparents, great-grandparents, great-great-grandparents, and at least 6 recognized generations before them, we share a common origin, language, and culture that are still alive and practiced in a small Nahua community in the Huasteca region of Veracruz. Okay? In this region, this means that the same music that was here generations ago is still here today. The same mountains are still honored in the same way today. The same paths are walked today. The same food is shared today. It is a living, collective, and continuous memory through time. Being Nahua is not an aesthetic category or a memory of the past. It's a daily practice. Conceptualizing what it means to be indigenous in Mexico is complex because our ancestral worldview is now deeply interwoven with mestizaje, cultural and racial mixing, and Christianity, and also because there is enormous diversity of native peoples that prevents us from speaking of a single indigenous experience. To speak of nationalism and patriotism is to speak of identity, of belonging to a territory and to a political community. In theory, they are usually useful, positive concepts. They evoke pride, unity, shared memory, and common project, particularly since the formation of the modern nation state, as my friend Pedro said, in Mexico. In Mexico, both nationalism and patriotism have incorporated indigenous symbols as the foundation of their identity. For example, during my basic education, I grew up sincerely feeling that pride. The embroidery, the colors, the music, the murals, the narrative of the independence and resistance taught me in school were moving to because they weren't distant images. The figures in the textbooks looks like my grandparents or the neighborhood or the music played during celebrations sounds like my home. The colors and symbols of nature felt personal in my memory because I have grown up with them. But over time, I began to claim attention because the problems described, like slavery, segregation, or marginalization, also felt more personal. As a law student, and later as a philosophy student, I understood that one of the deepest structural problems we face as an indigenous people is language. Our mother language is not only a different means of communication, but a different way of conceptualizing the world. Nahuatl, like other native languages, is agglutinative and polysynthetic language. Each word concentrates specific meanings and describes reality in practical, vivid, and sensory way. It does not privilege.
Panelist for Northern American students.
Sorry.
Yeah, now I'll meet them no well. Yeah, I'll meet them no well.
Okay. Um. I was okay. It's not. Yum, 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 yum.
We were talking about the language, Oli.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Okay. In a sensory way, it does not privilege abstraction but experience. In our culture, knowledge is not separate from practice. It is sung, danced, walked, eaten, and observed. Ancestral music is not just an aesthetic experience, but a way of traveling the same paths and mountains of revering the lakes, of observing the animals, of wearing what we see and how we live in community. In particular, there is a different way of relating to nature, a less mechanistic and more animistic way. Without this with this explanation, our worldview is not any less real, logical, or rational. It's logical, real, and rational, but is sensitive. Thus, language is memory and memory is territory. Therefore, our language does not separate from the environment. It links memory with the landscape and identity with place and people who lives there. So when Mexican nationalism um, takes indigenous cultural elements to build an aesthetic image of the country, the experience is bittersweet. On the one on hand, these symbols include us in the national narrative. On the other, they are often emptied of the ritual practice and communal deep to become decorative emblems. The embroidery is celebrated, but the person who embroiders it and what it means is not always heard. Is not always heard. The image of the indigenous past is exalted in many times in a stereotypical way, while the real country uses language as a barrier to not address structural and systemic needs. And while the resources
Excuse me,
Mhm.
Olympia. Pedro, could you turn off your screen?
Can you repeat me, please?
We're just trying to have Pedro close his screen.
Okay, yes.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry for my screen. Yes. Okay, give me a minute.
No, Oli, tú estás bien. Era mi cámara.
Okay, sorry. Okay, give me a minute. Okay, thank you. Sorry. Okay. Um, okay, well, the real country, the image of the indigenous past is exiled in many times in a stereotypical way. While the real country used languages has a barrier to do and not address structural incentive and structural systemic needs. Nationalism, from my experience, is not a political abstraction, but a constant tension between belonging to a country and protecting it, and belonging to that country and protecting myself, protecting a living memory that can be diluted and can be erased. They mean knowing that, of course, I am Mexican, but before any other identity, I am a Nahua people. And that my first responsibility is to my community, to my people, to, to my language, to the memory and worldview that sustain us. There is an ethical weight in saying who I am and how I present to that identity to the world. And that distinction matters because nationalism and patriotism signify a constant tension between pride and caution, between belonging and protection. They mean recognizing that my now identity predates the state, but also inhabits it. Nationalism evokes a protective instinct, a necessary distrust for survival. Historically, nation building projects require simplification that can unify millions, but simplification can flatten difference and erase nuances that without humanistic values of dignity render people invisible. So I conceive of solidarity as an essential component for practicing nationalism and patriotism so that they do not remain merely as discourse but can become a practice that transcends speech. As indigenous people, our history has been marked by persecution, exploitation, and resistance. And if we have survived as a people, or as a people, is precisely because is precision because of internal solidarity, because of community work, the transmission of knowledge, and collective care. However, that history has also taught us to distrust external solidarity when it presents itself only as a rhetoric, just as a discourse. We have learned that not all help is neutral, that every discourse has an end and is not necessarily honest, that then that objective is not necessarily honest. That do not mean closing ourselves of the others, but rather seeking an honest or his horizontal solidarity, capable of listening and recognizing that our ways of understanding the world are equally valid. Because true solidarity is not a symbolic appropriation, but listening and shared responsibility. Because something has been clear for generations for me and my town. When the institution of contemporary state fall, mutual care allows to survival and dignity beyond any collective or individual identity. And that is all. And thank you for hearing me.
So, Olympia, I am just so pleased by that presentation. I think it was extremely deep. I want to study it. I want to, all of the presentations are good, but I want to study that presentation very carefully when you're in writing. I really am very extremely impressed. How I'm sorry that these images were appearing, Olympia, in your presentation. I really regret that different faces were showing up, but that doesn't take away from the depth of what you were saying. How about do we have some questions for her, for Olympia? Okay, we have a question in the chat, which I'm going to read. This is from Hayden Lauren. Hi, Olympia. What do you think is a primary challenge to moving beyond symbolic appropriation to responsible solidarity? Excellent question. Olympia, are you able to see it? The chat?
Okay, thank you for the question. I think one of the most challenges is the idiom, and the language. And because our language is different and our cosmovision is different for that reason. And we have objects and any objects that can be opposite, different than the develop of the country. For example, Mexico needs more work, more works, but that need or more houses for people, or Mexico needs more territory, for example. And the question, the solution for that many times is give the mountain or give the territory behind the next at the lake. And for us is different. For us the object, for us the development, for us the respect for the nature is different, so we have in many times it's not language or poor or other things are just a symbolic hangover. No, not hangover, it's just a symbolic, or I don't know how can I say pretexto, if any. Okay.
No, you're
We
right. Pretext.
Pretext, okay, is just a pretext to the true object of the government. The government wants our resources. The government always wants our resources. Resources, human resources, has cultural resources, nature resources, and that is the complex for us development. And for that reasons, we have to protect us. It's not just the culture, it's just that if we thought in the world, if the first thought and in the morning is economy, you have to explain, you have to take many things to explotarlas, to and that is that you take without dignity, the all people, not just people in our cosmovision. People is not the unique end that have dignity. We found dignity in the water, in the resources, in the earth, in the air, and animals. We found dignity in everyone, and so all we are dignity. We can't take without dignity that. So
You're
for that
saying
reason,
this is very understandable, okay? You're trying to
okay,
avoid
okay.
exploitation, and you're explaining that your vision of the world, cosmovision.
Yes,
Very well
yes, it's
said.
that.
Very well said. Any more questions for Olympia? This is a very deep topic, and we're going to have extra time in this 3 hours. So take advantage of her. Kaden says thank you. Who else has something for Pedro has a question.
Well, more than a question is, I just want to show my gratitude to you, Olympia, because I know it's not really easy to talk about our own lives and put it in a way of examination. You know, it's really interesting when you analyze your own background and you put it in the table here. So thank you very much. I think you have done a great job, and I know it's really been a fight, you know, during your whole life. So thank you very much and keep going.
Very good. Thank you, Hitesh. I mean, Pedro, excuse me. So our next speaker is Gladiola Villegas Gomez,
I'm here.
and she is here, and she's been studying different institutions all of her life. And I think if I try to list all of her institutions that she's been studying at, we're going to run out of time. Okay? Isn't that true, Gladiola? So currently she's at the Centro Unitario Tierra de Bendición, and she's going to speak about, as an indigenous student living in Mexico, she's going to tackle these same topics that Olympia was just covering. So I'm very much looking forward to your talk as well.
Thank you, thank you. Tlaxcamatimiec, Nisnelian y Yolpaki Pampanica Nokiani Contlali Setlastoli, Tleni Masewal Nemilisli Ika Nahuatl. In my mother tongue, I'm really happy to share something valuable for me and my community, the Nahua ethnia. So I'm gonna start by sharing my screen. Can you see my presentation?
Yes, we can.
Oh, thank you, thank you. Oh, well, good morning, Honorable Mr. Theodore S. Wells and distinguished audience who honor me with your presence and attention. Many thanks to the North American Educational Initiative Foundation for inviting me and allowing me to share in this space. I feel deeply honored to be here with you today. Today, I speak before you not only as a university student, but an indigenous woman, born in and a resident of the Huasteca region of Hidalgo, Mexico, carrying with me the glorious memory of my ancestors, the voice of my community, and the responsibility of my generation. From my perspective, nationalism, patriotism, and solidarity are not abstract political concepts. They are lived experiences. They are woven into languages, in land, memory, and collective struggle. Appreciated audience, if you allow me to begin, I would like to reflect on nationalism. According to the Labyrinth of Solitude, Octavio Paz writes, the Mexican does not want to be either Indian or Spanish, nor does he want to descend from them. He denies them and denies himself. This powerful reflection reveals a historical tension within Mexican identity. For contrast, for centuries, indigenous presence has been romanticized in art and discourse, yet marginalized in reality. Nationalism, from my perspective, must go beyond symbolic inclusion It must recognize indigenous peoples not merely as a mythical past, but as living nations within our great nation, Mexico. Nationalism also means recognizing that Mexico is multilingual, multi-ethnic, and pluricultural. A true nationalism should not erase difference, it should honor it. Now, distinguished audience, I would like to reflect on patriotism. Um, Patriotism is often described as love of country, but what does it mean to love a nation when your community still faces inequality in education, healthcare, and economic opportunities? From my perspective, patriotism is not blind loyalty. It is community-based teaching that plays a fundamental role. Knowledge is transmitted through daily practice, through agriculture, weaving, traditional medicine, and storytelling and ceremonies. Learning does not occur exclusively in classrooms. It happens in the fields, in kitchens, and in community assemblies. Patriotism therefore implies integrating formal education with community-based knowledge. It means building bridges between university spaces and rural communities. It means understanding that teaching is not unilateral transfer of information, but a shared process of dialogue. It also means, for example, in my beloved Nahuatl language, ensuring that new generation gain deeply knowledge of the language complemented by the use of its most recent alphabet released in 1982. Oral traditions are central to this process. Oral narrative preserves history, values, and identity. Through stories, we learn who we are, we learn about resistance, dignity, migration, and survival. Oral tradition is not merely storytelling, it is pedagogy, for it shapes ethical framework and collective memory. When indigenous students enter higher education, something that until the end of the last century was almost a heroic act, we often cross cultural borders. Jennifer Ho in Racial Ambiguity reflects on identity and racial complexity, noting that racial and ethnic identities are frequently interpreted through external assumptions rather than lived experiences. In this context, solidarity becomes essential. For me, solidarity means understanding that my educational achievements do not belong solely to me. They belong to my family who work the lands and fields, to my beloved parents who sacrifice opportunities to provide them for, sorry, to provide me, for me and my brothers, to the teachers who guided me through my academic project, my academic journey, to my dear students who have trusted in the knowledge I humbly share. But above all, they belong to the Almighty who has blessed me with work and scholarship opportunities in such a beautiful country as the United States of America. Every scholarship and support I have received is a community investment. I strive to give back to those around me a portion of the abundance I have gained through these academic experiences. For all these reasons, I believe equality does not mean uniformity. It means equity. It means recognizing structural disadvantages and actively working on to dismantle them. In my community, concern for others, the genuine care for another's well-being is deeply rooted. We do not ask whether helping will benefit us individually. We help because community survival depends on reciprocity. When someone builds a house, others support. When someone hurts, others accompany. When someone celebrates, everyone participates. This communal ethic challenges models of success based on extreme individualism. It reminds us that progress without collective well-being is an incomplete struggle. Through my struggle and that of my indigenous brothers and sisters, I dream of a Mexico where indigenous children can study science in their own language. A Mexico where oral traditions are integrated into national curriculum. A Mexico where an indigenous young woman entering a university classroom does not feel she must choose between her culture and her academic and professional growth. If we truly listen to the historical narrative of thinkers such as Octavio Paz, we recognize the complexity of Mexican identity. If we engage with perspective like Jennifer Hall, we understand that dignity and identity is dynamic and socially constructed. And if we listen to indigenous communities themselves, we learn that resilience, cooperation, and dignity are not abstract ideals. They are lived realities. It is necessary to acknowledge that Mexico has made significant progress in ethnic inclusion, particularly in recognizing and strengthening indigenous languages. For decades, indigenous peoples were perceived only as part of the historical part or as folkloric elements within a nationalist discourse. However, in recent years, the government and various sectors of society have begun to recognize that Mexico is a pluricultural and multilingual nation. As indigenous peoples, we have advanced, but we continue to fight so that our languages, culture, and knowledge systems are not only accepted, but fully valued as essential parts of Mexico's past, present, and future. In this spirit, and as part of my moral commitment to my beloved Nahua people, I can share that I have had the privilege and personal, academic, and professional satisfaction of consistently organizing initiatives that involve youth, children, adults, and the broader community in the revitalization in the Nahuatl language through working groups and conversation clubs. I have also had the honor of actively participating in conferences in culture, religion, and Nahuatl language studies both in Mexico and the United States. I stand here exposing my ethnic culture as part of a generation that rejects invisibility. And because our national does not erase, it affirms. And our patriotism does not silence, it questions and improves. Our solidarity does not exclude, it embraces. So the future of Mexico depends on transforming symbolic inclusion and structural equity through education, education that is firmly rooted in our communities, enriching our traditions while expanding opportunities for development. As Nelson Mandela once said, education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world and our ethnic world as well. Finally, in this regard, as an indigenous woman in Mexico, I have always carried and continue carrying multiple responsibilities. I must succeed academically. I must honor my origins. I must advocate for equity. I must build bridges between traditional knowledge and modern institutions. For that reason, I firmly believe that when one of us moves forward, our community move forward too. And when that happens, Mexico and humanity are transformed for the better. Dear friends, I am attentive to your kind comments and valuable questions, if any. Thank you so much. Tlaxcamatimiac in my mother tongue, Nahuatl.
Dr. Villegas, what a tremendous presentation. Is my video on?
Yes.
Can you see my handsome face?
Yeah.
That was an incredible presentation. I'm really blown away. All of these presentations, I'm thinking about when I'm kind of a senior person, and I just don't think I could have pulled these off when I was any of you guys' ages, I think we have to get right away to the questions. All right. For maybe we'll call you Gladiola. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's okay. Thank you.
Okay, we got to have some questions here.
Okay.
What do we got? Who's going to be asking a question?
Hey, so I was curious. In your presentation, I know that you kind of mentioned the protection of the various different ethnic and cultural groups within Mexico, especially with the preservation of language. Is there any thing in particular that you are advocating for in that front,
Yeah, actually, as
like
I
within
said
social communities?
Oh yeah. Let's see if I got the idea of your question. Yeah,
Yeah.
actually, as I said in my presentation, I have been working with groups of students and children and teenagers in order to preserve and to give the importance and to recognize all the values that we have in our communities, and not just the language, but all the activities and traditions and that we should combine between this knowledge from indigenous people and science. So it's I think recently I have organized an conversational club in Nahuatl, so everyone can join and speak about their experiences and in valuing in just describing what's going to be going on with this, our mother tongue, Nahuatl in this case. Well, there are many activities that I have been organizing, also some conferences and like motivating and encouraging my students to take some opportunities in scholarship from the Embassy of the United States. Like some of my students went to Universidad de las Américas in Puebla to take a training about cultural and revitalization in indigenous languages.
That's outstanding. Nicholas, what a great, Constantinos, excuse me. What a great question. Did you have a follow-up?
Not a follow-up, but I definitely appreciate what you're doing. My papu, my grandfather immigrated from Greece, and the language is something that I and my siblings kind of lost. Most Greek households, they maintain it by kind of like staying involved with the Orthodox Church. So I definitely relate to the concept of like the language, and really preservation of language is so important for the preservation of like wider culture. So you're doing amazing work, and thank you again.
Thank you.
Who else do I have for this wonderful, distinguished speaker? Who else is going to ask a question?
I have a question in the chat, but I can also like say it. Um,
Wonderful.
yeah, so hi, thank you so much for your speech. It was very nice. So I was wondering, I live in the United States and I see people that have indigenous backgrounds and they have immigrated here, or their parents have immigrated here,
Nina,
and
can you put your camera on?
oh yeah,
Thank you.
hi. So they have immigrated here, or their parents or their grandparents immigrated here, and um, especially for younger children, it's very hard to preserve their culture there or take it along with them, especially in the midst of sometimes the lack of acceptance in the United States with indigenous culture. So I was wondering, for people of Mexican heritage living in the United States and having children here, how can one encourage the preservation of culture, when there is sometimes lack of acceptance?
Oh yeah, thank you for your question. It is so interesting. I think it's a hard situation, and it's a really challenge for parents who live or who have migrated to the United States. But I think it comes deeply from our inside, from the bottom of our heart. Because if we know as parents, people who have children, if they as parents feel their roots, if they love their culture, culture in the mother tongue, in this case, I'm talking about Nahuatl, I think they can transmit to the children by in this case, as I said, by oral tradition, by telling them, illustrating them, their children, how life was in Mexico when they live in this country. And they need to value first they as parents and then to transmit it to the children. But definitely it's a great challenge, and it is not easy because they are living and they are experiencing life in a different style, in a different, it is modern life, and sometimes the comparison is not like really equal. So that's why many students, many children rejects this heritage. But well, I would like to invite parents to first feel who they are, recognize themselves, and then transmit to their children, because everyone, I think, really needs to have an identity.
Very great answer. Thank you so much for your answer.
Thank you for your question.
Well, that was a wonderful wonderful exchange. Now, I given the need that we learned earlier that Sophia wants to be talking at before 12:30. Yes, Sergio, you have a question? Before 12:30. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Sergio? So um I need to ask I'm sorry, Olivia, I need to ask you something.
Sorry,
I'm sorry to
Ted,
put
there's a question from the audience from Adelaine.
Oh, hello.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I just wanted to say thank you for your presentation. I'm currently a student in the United States, studying philosophy. While I cannot relate to your struggles being indigenous in Mexico, I definitely resonated with the comment that you said about feeling like you had to choose between your cultural identity and your educational ambitions. So I first off wanted to start off appreciating that comment. Second, like I said, I'm very unfamiliar with the Mexican education system. My parents are from Mexico, but neither of them received any higher education, so I'm not exactly sure what kind of trends or cultural there is over there. But as a low-income student who comes from, like a Hispanic American immigrant background, I noticed that a lot of people who are from these backgrounds who manage to break into higher education spaces come in and talk about how they will give back to their communities, and then later, just go to grad school or do something that in the end benefits them, which is great because it promotes, I don't know, social mobility for them and their families. However, I wanted to ask if that trend kind of exists in Mexican education systems, and how you feel you might be diverting away from that, if that makes sense. I apologize if that wasn't the most articulate question.
Gladiola, are you able to hear that and answer? Gladiola, were you able to hear that question from Adelaine?
Oh, I'm so sorry. I I had some audio problems. Uh, is the
Adelaine,
question for
would you be able to repeat the question to Gladiola?
Yes, I was just asking, in my own personal experience, my parents are immigrants. I know a lot of children of immigrants, and whenever it comes to going to university, all of them have these very big ideas about, somehow giving back to their communities that they came from. However, it's my experience that I noticed that a lot of them in pursuit of advancing economically and socially, they choose to, work in something else that isn't really community focused. So I was wondering if you also noticed that same trend in Mexican academia and maybe how you yourself are maybe choosing to give back to your community uh, outside of your education, if that makes sense.
Oh, thank you. It's awesome. It's an interesting question. It's another big challenge because, as I was explaining, as a woman, as an indigenous woman, and as an indigenous student, I have experienced this because sometimes I feel like I really need to choose between moving forward, developing my personal academic and professional growth. But I need to ensure that my identity is stable, is taking into account wherever I am, in my school, in classroom, in my job. And sometimes it's really hard because of course everyone needs to advance, but it's complicated sometimes to motivate our students. But I think my strategy that I have always used is to make to try to make our students to understand their identity by telling them some stories about their grandparents, how they live, showing some videos, and inviting them to write some stories, asking or interviewing their own parents and their own grandparents so that they can see, they can go back to see their heritage, their background, and then they need to combine this modernity and the heritage. I think it's a challenge, but I think if we if we arise our memory and our conscious, if we are conscious about this importance element in our life as indigenous, we can do something else in order to recognize the value. Nowadays, in many social media, in websites, there are people who try to make this job to revitalize the language, and I have seen that many young people have been captured by this idea of combining modernity and heritage. So they are like trying to make some conversation in order to join together these two elements in our lifestyle. But it's really hard to make conscious people if we don't feel from our heart. I don't know if it makes sense. I'm so sorry.
Yes, it did. Again, I do relate to that sentiment of having to choose between like your cultural and your identity with your education. So I really appreciated that comment, and I think you did a wonderful job.
Thank you.
Again, that was a wonderful exchange. Gladiola, once again, another great presentation, another great exchange.
Thank
Now,
you.
I was about to say earlier, Olivia, I need to ask you a question. I'm sorry we don't have a way to do this um, privately, but we have a presentation where Sophia needs to do this by more or less right now so that she can go to a class. Are you able to wait later? Because we're gonna
Yes.
after she's done, we're gonna have a 15-minute break. Is that okay,
Yes, we can
Olivia,
do
with
that.
you?
Mhm.
Thank you
Yes.
so much, Olivia. So, Sophia, are you available to give your presentation now?
Hi, if you wait for me only 5 minutes, I should be able. to present.
Okay, you have the floor.
Hi, do you listen to me?
Yes, did you turn on your video?
Yes, let me go quickly.
So are you able to begin now, Sophia?
Yeah, I'm coming. Sorry, it's because I was on class.
Oh, I apologize. Would you like us to have our 15-minute break now and do it at 12:30?
Yes, please.
Okay, perfect. So right now we're going to have a 15-minute break. Please stay with us and we will resume in at 12:30 sharp. Thank you. Okay, this is a commercial break. My wife, she got my lunch at guess where? You can see. You'll be happy to know that she's Mexican. Very pretty Mexican. But she does not like McDonald's. She likes Chick-fil-A. Sophia, would you like to begin?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
Okay, so first of all, I'm sorry for the disruptions. Well, I will present to you the presentation. Okay, do you see the presentation?
Perfect.
Okay, well, good morning. I would like to thank to Mr. Ted, Naif, and everyone present for the opportunity to be here today. My name is Sofia Cortés Regalado, and I am a Mexican student from Universidad Panamericana. And today I would like to talk about when the police fractures, ethics and community in temporary Mexico. That gives the answer of the question given the differences between classical, traditional, and contemporary critical interpretation of Mexican culture and history, what shared values can be identified. So first, I want to say that in the recent months, Mexico has experienced coordinated episodes of public violence, included armed road blockades that temporarily paralyze highways and urban spaces. And for some observers, these are security incidents, but for many citizens, they are disruptions of every civic life, of school, work, mobility, and trust. So let me begin with a question. What happens to a political community when fear enters ordinary space? Today, I approach this question not politically, but ethically. And I'm going to talk about two postures. One from Aristotle, author of the Nicomachean's Ethics, and one from Octavio Paz, Mexican author of the Labyrinth of Solitude. So let me begin with the classical framework. Aristotle in the Nicomachean's Ethics tells us that the good for a man is an activity of the soul in accordance with virtue. And for Aristotle, the police exist not merely for survival, but for living well. It is a moral community oriented toward the common good. And he writes that justice is a complete virtue in relation to another. So justice is not simply legality, it is a virtue that sustains relationships among citizens. And I want to ask, if justice weakens, what happens to the purpose of the police? Its ethical foundation begins to fracture. And when public spaces become associated with fear rather than shared belonging, they tell us the purpose of the political community is destabilized. And Aristotle also states that friendship seems to hold states together. The civic friendship, philia, is mutual recognition and trust among citizens. Road blockades do not only interrupt traffic, they interrupt shared space. The signal that common ground is fragile, and when common ground feels unstable, civic friendship weakens. So I ask, is this logistical or ethical disruption? And the answer is both. So now let me shift to a contemporary and critical reflection. Octavio Paz in The Labyrinth of Solitude writes, solitude is the deepest condition of a human being. In the Mexican context, solitude becomes historical, and Paz describes an identity shaped by rupture, conquest, mistrust, and interiorized reserve. He observes that the Mexican often protects the self behind a symbolic mask. So, what happens when repeated public violence reinforces this posture of defensive reserve? Fear becomes normalized, silence becomes survival, distrust becomes a cultural habit. Contemporary violence does not create fracture from nothing. It intensifies historical wounds. And a good question is, how can civic trust flourish where historical experience teaches self-protection? At the symbolic center of the labyrinth of solitude lies the trauma of origin. Paz writes, the question of origin is the secret center of our anxiety and anguish. The figure of La Chingada, historically associated with La Malinche, embodies violation, rupture, and broken lineage. And the Mexican Paz Argus often imagines himself as hijo de la nada, a son of nothingness. This symbolic wound shapes collective consciousness. And here we see something crucial. Contemporary violence does not merely disrupt security. It reactivates unresolved historical anxiety. Paz analyzed the figure of the Pachuco in the United States. The Pachuco neither returns to Mexico nor assimilates into America. He writes, the Pachuco affirms nothing, defends nothing, except his exasperate will not to be. This is identity as negation, refusal of belonging, and when civic structures weaken, similar gestures of negation reappear. Alienation became posture, disaffiliation becomes identity. And in Aristotelian terms, this is a crisis of belonging to the polis. And Jet Pass also identifies moments when solitude breaks. And one of these is the fiesta. Fiesta is party in English. So he writes, the solitary Mexican loves fiestas and public gatherings. The art of the fiesta has been preserved intact among us. And the fiesta suspends hierarchy and it tears the mask. And Paz also reflects on death. He said, tell me how you die, and I will tell you who you are. Death is smoke, familiar, integrated in our culture. But Paz warns that indifference toward death can mirror indifference toward life. These cultural patterns reveal a profound ambivalence toward vulnerability and communion. But he also says that historical context is very important, like the revolution and the return to the mother. For Paz, the Mexican Revolution was not merely political, it was existential. The revolution is the search for ourselves and a return to the mother. It was an attempt to reconcile fractured origin of conquest, violation. He says that is the reclaim of historical continuity. And he also says in the postdata that Paz later warns that deeper structures persisted. He analyzed Mexican power as a pyramid and continuity of vertical authority culminating in Tlatelolco. The massacre of Tlatelolco reveals that a past we believe buried is alive among us. Here, the fracture of the police becomes visible again, and violence reveals continuity with unresolved past forms of domination. And well, knowing about Aristotle and past, we can know now the contrast between classical and critical dialogue. And Aristotle offers a normative vision of the polis. Justice is relational virtue, and civic friendship as question. But Paz offers a generational diagnosis of Mexico, identity marked by solitude and rupture, and historical consciousness of fracture. They are not opposed, they are complementary. And the classical gives ethical direction, and the critical gives historical lucidity. And together they prevent a naive idealism and paralysis of fatalism. And now I want to answer the question about the shared values. Despite methodological differences, both frameworks converge on shared values: dignity, justice, relational responsibility, communal accountability, the human search for belonging. And Aristotle grounds this philosophically. Past reveals why they are fragile and why they matter. And he concludes that for the first time in our history, we are contemporaries of all humanity. Mexico crisis is not isolated. It reflects a broader crisis of civic trust. But I want to ask to you, what does patriotism mean in a context of civic fragility? And it cannot be mere symbolism, and it cannot be poor critique. From Aristotle, patriotism implies participation in common good, and from past, patriotism must acknowledge historical wounds. Solidarity, then, is not an emotion, it is a habit. As Aristotle reminds us, we become just by doing just acts. And if the polis exists for living well, where is the virtue cultivated? And the answer is education. Education shapes whether a crisis produces fear of responsibility. It can normalize fragmentation, or it can cultivate civic courage and historical awareness. If Mexico is not an essence but a process, then the policy is not a finished structure but a task. And let me close with Aristotle. The city-state exists not only for the sake of living, but for the sake of living well. The question before Mexico and before any society experiencing internal fracture is it only how to survive instability, or is it how to rebuild the ethical condition for living well together? The police may fracture, but dignity, justice, and responsibility remain recoverable horizons. And thank you very much.
Well, Sophia, that was wonderful, and we can see people are applauding it. Thank you very much. And I'm looking for my
Yeah.
good. So, Sophia, that was outstanding, and very, very concise, very, very precise, in excellent uses of your sources. Do we have some questions for Konstantinos is applauding your work, among others. And do we have questions for Sophia? Do we have questions for Sophia?
Yes, I have one.
Very good, Sergio. Go in. Go ahead.
Okay. Sophia, you said that education was the solution about creating identity, but in Marxist theory, how we can overcome the material conditions to get education as a solution.
I'm sorry. Yeah, well, it's complicated because Marx talks about the capitalism as an exploitative system driven by class conflict. And we usually live kind of that. What we should do is difficult because right now I study pedagogy and I would like to make a change in Mexico. And it's like kind of idealism, but we need to change that. How do you say that way to think to the population? And maybe it's not like in education form at schools because it's kind of difficult, but we can make a change only by talking to the people outside and then to try to be at Secretaría de Educación to make other changes, like in the programs. You know, for example, right now, you're from Mexico, no?
Yeah, I'm from Mexico.
Yeah, I think you know about the person that did the books of education with this kind of theory and idealism. And
Just a second. I'm not talking about capitalism critic, but the material, uh, well, yeah, a material perspective of education. Because if we don't have material conditions, well, enough material conditions, how we can learn and get those knowledge just because of education?
okay, I already understand your question. Well, it's supposed in the Constitution we have public and we have all the materials and we have everything, but one thing is what is right in the Constitution and one is the reality. And the reality is that we don't have public and obligation education in Mexico, and we don't have the same rights. Like, for example, I am in a private school because I work for being here, but most of people doesn't have this chance and they don't have education. So I don't know if you know, but in the history of Mexico, at the beginning, more or less when it was the Porfiriato, they began to give classes at the parks. And I know it's kind of difficult because we live violence, but it is not only necessary to have a school for giving education. It is the ideal to have a school, but you can educate people in every place you want to do it. And if you begin to talk to the people about things, they're going to become interested and they will like to learn. So the first thing we need to do is to make people love to learn because Mexico doesn't have the culture of loving to learn. We think education is to memorize, to have grades, to have a title, but this is not education. We need to begin from the from yeah for the love to love to educate. And I know it sounds so imaginary, but now that I am studying my career and having practiced it, I have seen that if you make people to love to know, they begin to want to be educated.
Thank you.
Do you have any follow-up for that?
Yeah, that was a really good answer.
Does anyone else, I mean, there's several Mexicans on the call, or anybody from Canada or the United States, do you perceive that what Sophia just talked about of education as kind of not as a love for learning, but as a means to an end, the end being a job or the end being more money, the end being meeting wealthy people or whatever, or power. Is that is that very common throughout the continent? What do our participants think?
Yes. For one, Sophia, you did an amazing job. I actually missed like the first minute because I was trying to get back into the call, but from what I saw from your presentation, you did amazing. I think that it's something that I've honestly even struggled with throughout my educational experience here in America. Education has become at large a means to the end. The end being not the end being getting a job, getting raising your social status, but we're kind of seeing what it feels like a collapse of that system, where it's just not really working anymore, and our education system, we're seeing like actually a regression in all levels of like academic progress. So definitely kind of we need to like reimagine what it actually means to educate, to learn, rather than teaching people to think a certain way. We need to teach people how to think for themselves at all. And I feel like I'd kind of like to pick your brain on that, Sophia. Um, I want to go into education. I want to be a part of that change. But what do you feel like, from a social perspective, we can do to kind of re-engage passion for learning, kind of create that passion and drive for people to excel?
Okay, that's kind of difficult. I'm not secure about the response, but I know it's difficult more for Mexico because the president we have right now is kind of complicated and they want to give us this information. And yeah, most of the Mexican doesn't know how to think. They only began to do what people think is the correct. And the culture, I said, of the conquest, of the disruption is part of our values. And I think it's something very interesting for me. I don't know if you know character education. Character education is, I think, is the prime model and is an interesting way to educate people because it says that everything becomes from the virtue and the values, and it's a kind of different education because most of the times we know Montessori and other models, but character education begins of the virtue of the values at for doing the reality to be active in the society. Right now at Mexico, I am participating in a project of character education in the Secretary of Education, Public Education, and we want to begin to do this in public education for making them to think, to begin to use the virtues, the values, and begin to do a change. And for doing a change is not only to educate the kids, it's to educate parents too. Because if you don't have the model of someone who does good, how you are going to do good? You are going to do only good at school because they told you to do good at school. But we need to educate kids and educate parents for doing this process of modeling and then to become a new society that looks for the flourishing.
That was
Thank you.
excellent.
Thank you.
Did you have another follow-up?
No, you definitely answered my question. You did a really good job. And I think one thing in particular that can definitely help is engagement in the arts. I think that engagement in the arts can definitely kind of help with the desire and the passion to learn and grow. Yeah, thank you.
So I wanted to give us opportunity for Alexander. Do you want to you've written into the chat Alexander Hernandez Garcia. would you like to ask Sophia your question from the chat?
Sure. Yes, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for your presentation, Sophia. I think it was very eloquently put. I think the idea of education being a means to an end is something that is, at the end of the day, very surface level, right? And education is a means to become acquaintanced with any given professional field, any idea of academic study. But I think that it's just as important to find a purpose beyond that, a greater purpose within the education in the pursuit of a career. And so, what are your thoughts on that? I myself, being Mexican American, studying here in the United States, have felt that way. I think I've shared that sentiment where I've thought to myself at times, an education is merely a means to an end. However, I think as I've continued to develop alongside my ideology, my peers, I've found greater purpose and a greater sense of joy in being a lifelong learner. So I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Okay, sorry, but could you repeat the question? I know the context, but I don't remember the question.
Sure. The question really boils down to how, how would I phrase this? I know that an education is truly a means to an end at the end of the day. But how do you suggest we as emerging leaders find a greater sense of purpose, underlying purpose beyond that surface level notion of what an education can do for you?
So you mean for telling for giving people why the purpose of education is a good idea?
I guess that's one way to frame it, yes.
Well, I don't know how it can be a good way to say to the people, but knowing the conditions we live and the culture we have, we know that they sold us education for having a good future. Most of the times because we live in a country that is not in the first top of the countries. So I think first, for making them to know why it's important for have education is to demonstrate by acts. Because if you only tell people it is important to be educated, it's important to go to school, you're not making a culture for the people to want to go to school. They only see it like an obligation. So the first thing we can do is doing acts. And I think the best way for doing acts is knowing that they are people that has good education at the universities we are, trying to be the best and not to be kind of terrified that we don't have good people that here. We have good people that want to make a change. And we need to do kind of projects to be with that people who wants to make the change. Obviously to have contacts. It's a way to make this difference. But the first thing I think, and it sounds like romance, but is to want to be that change, to know that, I don't know if it sounds like so risky, but I will die for changing education. And if I need to die for people to know that I was making a change, it could make a change.
Yeah, and that's very admirable to pursue that kind of goal and to really envelop yourself in that purpose. I think that more than anything, an education is not just a means to an end. It's a paradigm shift in the course of one's life. Um, and I would what I would say to that is the this notion of being able to die for your cause. is to find joy and purpose in living for your cause, right? I think that it is very powerful to have that ideological framing backing your efforts to making actionable and tangible change, enduring change. But we ought to also believe in our own participation in said future, right? And our own ability to see the execution of that future to the end. And so I think that I agree that it is absolutely crucial to show, not just tell. But then also not want ourselves to become, martyrs or sacrifices for these purposes, right? We don't have to be. We can work together to collaborate and make enduring change, and that doesn't necessarily mean you have to die for your cause, right? But that is, keeping that in mind that you're willing to go to said lengths to see it executed is something that's very admirable, and so I commend you for that.
Thank you very much for that dialogue. Very useful. Pedro has a comment.
Yes, I would like to mention that like combining Aristotle's famous phrase that all human beings by nature desire to know, and with the data we have from the science of the human brain, learning is just part of our human condition. So I think it's interesting.
That was a wonderful exchange, and Sophia, you did a great job. So everybody is, the we're kind of like challenging everybody to speak English, and you're just doing a great job, everyone. And I would like now to go to Olivia Berger, and she's going to be speaking about these three topics as it relates to citizens of the United States in a classical traditional environment. Olivia is at Yale University, where my father went. I had to bring that up. I'm so happy she's in this meeting.
Yes, thank you very much for that introduction. Like Mr. Will said, I'm currently a student at Yale University studying ethics, politics, and economics. And yeah, I'm excited for this presentation. So I'll go ahead and share my screen and begin. Okay, is everyone able to see this?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So I'll begin. I'm presenting on nationalism, patriotism, and solidarity in the United States. I really appreciate the conversation that's been cultivated beforehand over the last few presentations. I'll just say my presentation is focused more on my perspective coming from the United States and kind of how our historical background has really shaped these three virtues more into the political philosophy side of this conversation. So, a little bit about my perspective. I grew up in South Dakota and now I'm a student at Yale. So, I would say where I grew up is an area with a lot of rich Indigenous perspectives that I've definitely learned from, but also plenty of Western teachings. So, I would say that I've been exposed to kind of both of those ideals, as well as my own experience participating in the US education system, which I would say is like very westernized. Um, this is just like a general perspective that I'll be approaching this question from. So I think it's really important to clarify the foundation of American virtues because these three major virtues really influence the political landscape in the United States today. But I think it's even more important that we recognize the historical foundation that has really been built for us up until this point. So, a lot of American political philosophy can really be boiled down into a few key documents like the Declaration of Independence and the US Constitution, as well as general knowledge of natural rights. I think that, especially in America, these three virtues tend to lead us more towards these individualistic and very patriotic sort of ideals, which might just be unique when you compare it to some other countries. I also think there's like a really key tension in the United States between this idea of universal rights versus loyalty to one's group, whether that's one's state, one's ethnicity, one's culture. And there's a key tension over when we're prioritizing our group versus prioritizing our nation. I also think when we look into the perspectives, I touched a little bit on this individualistic perspective that kind of tends to overlook a lot of American virtues as well as overall ideas of US tradition and loyalty. But of course, I wanted to say we should keep in mind that colonial history in the United States has definitely influenced how these virtues play out even today. And I think that's something it's important that we still combat within the American educational system. So each of these values are like very independent, but they're really intertwined and they end up working together, which I think other speakers have touched on as well, that really the three virtues are necessary in order to construct meaningful discourse. So my presentation is really broken down into the three key virtues and how I see each one working independently. And then I'll finally end with showing more of their intersection. So first with nationalism, I'm defining this again from a very Western lens. I think in the United States, we would perhaps define nationalism as how a country unites itself to maintain national sovereignty and independence. This might look like shared political and cultural principles that unite a country and make it easily identifiable. In the United States, major influences are Enlightenment thinkers like John Locke, kind of proponents of these ideas of natural rights that is very prevalent within the United States. Other key documents, as well as a general national identity that tends to unite a lot of people. I think in the United States, we see such a rich variety of cultures and backgrounds, which is why nationalism kind of works to bring a common ground to everyone that's in the United States. This manifests in a few key ways. I think a few ways that United States citizens are united through nationalism begins with a commitment to constitutional order. Values such as like freedom and liberty are really universal within our country, as well as like adherence to traditional principles of self-governance and popular sovereignty. But also there are some aspects of nationalism that could get quite dangerous. For example, like American exceptionalism, where I think sometimes by forcing a shared cultural value, we almost diminish it and make it very difficult for everyone's voices to be heard. So second, I'll move on to patriotism. I think through the Western lens, we'd really see patriotism as loyalty and commitment to one's country. In the United States, I think a lot of popular religions like Christian and Judaism really bring a strong influence into how patriotism has been the foundation of patriotism within our country. The manifestations I see of patriotism are often like in American pride, but also in civic participation. In the United States, really showing your commitment to the country is often by serving in the military, jury duty, or just even common principles such as helping out within your community. But further, one aspect of patriotism that I find the most appealing throughout history is this idea of constant criticism of the United States. We've seen ever since the foundation of American political philosophy that the actual politics in the United States have gone through quite tumultuous times and have really changed drastically, which is why when citizens are able to criticize the country freely with our freedom of speech, are able to protest and just use their critical freedoms to peacefully express their ideas, it often manifests in concrete change because it shows improvement for the country. I actually think being able to criticize our country is almost like a way to show your love for the country and show that you care so much about the state of your country improving. And then the last virtue is solidarity. So I would define this as collective action within a group to achieve shared goals. A few major influences, again, religious thought, ideas like the common good and social contract theory, and just other sorts of philosophical foundations that really emphasize ideas of community and unity. The manifestations within the United States are often things like shared rights, responsibilities, and duties, overcoming collective action problems, and oftentimes seeing citizens really unite themselves for a common cause, whether that's social change or political change or economic change. And then finally, I wanted to touch on the interconnectedness of all three of these values. I would almost kind of break down each virtue into a pillar of our nation. I thought of nationalism as national identity, patriotism as national pride, and solidarity as national unity. It's really hard to have just two out of the three. And I think with some of the strongest countries, it's most important to have all three, really building the foundations of political philosophy. And with that, that's mostly what I would think more of the American view through the lens of this like Western classical education would say for the power of these three virtues within political philosophy. I left a few key resources that I'd be happy to distribute after these presentations and kind of more of the like academic side of this. But with that, I'm totally open to questions.
Thank you so much, Olivia. Part of you're getting some applause in the chat. I could hear in part of what you were saying words of Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. and other thinkers and critics, and how going back to the earliest periods of the history of the country, and how you were saying that that is really an expression of continuous improvement is also love of country, while others might be disagreeing with those voices of change and maybe protesting the protesters. They also would be doing the same thing. So it's a interaction. Perhaps it's a virtuous circle. It could be, it can be a virtuous circle. What do other people think? Especially from the Canadian and Mexican perspectives and the American. Pedro, did you have a comment?
I'm thinking about how to formulate a question, but thank you, Olivia. It was really interesting. And well, actually, I was wondering, do you think virtues actually change throughout history, or the roots of virtue never changes? Because maybe, I don't know, a patriotic from the beginning of the Federalists of the United States would think differently about what do you think now about patriotism?
Yes, thank you so much for your question, Pedro. I would respond by thinking, in my opinion, the roots of virtue are pretty similar now as they were hundreds of years ago. But I think that the manifestations and the actions that come from these virtues have changed more, and maybe our interpretations of the virtues have changed throughout time. But I think that there's still this same sort of like rooting in fundamental virtues. And I actually think it's very powerful to look back to the traditional rootings of these virtues almost as a check to ensure that we're on the right trajectory forward as a country.
Thank you.
Yes.
Hey,
Who else has very good. Go ahead.
sorry. Doesn't necessarily pertain to your presentation, but I was just kind of curious. What are you majoring in? I may have not caught it.
Yeah. So I'm kind of between two majors right now, but I'm thinking either ethics, politics, and economics or global affairs.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely.
Who else has something for Olivia? Certainly in Mexico, you feel the the influence of the United States on these issues. To what extent, yeah, do you have questions for her about where these influence comes from?
I have a question. Olivia, how do you reconcile the confronted concepts of sense of belonging and solidarity? Because it could be seem like a confrontation.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's actually a really key tension in the United States between solidarity and community, and even just like a more individualistic perspective versus valuing community and connection. I think it's really important to reconcile both. I think, especially in America, it's important that individuals are more individualistic thinkers and able to make decisions for themselves very, very rationally and very self-critically. But I think in our communities, we need more engagement and to sometimes even move away from that individualist perspective, which just might looking like engaging in community more, helping out with others, engaging in collective action, or just being a voice for those issues that are really important to you. And I think by encouraging more community, it would really help the United States and help the citizens find a sense of belonging rather than hostility between each other, especially when it comes to reconciling different viewpoints on issues.
Okay, Iran, are you able to access the, are you able to talk?
Oh yeah, thank you so very much. I was wondering if I had like anything wrong regarding my my own setup. Uh, but first, Olivia, thank you so much for your insight about this topic. And sorry if I cannot also like open my camera. But I was wondering, I believe like we can all agree that at the end of the day, more people is going to be better towards a certain goal. So I was wondering, like there are such economies such as like Europe Union. Would it be possible for us as well, considering the three countries that is Mexico, United States, and Canada. Sorry for putting Mexico first, my bad. Uh, to come on to an agreement or common ground towards how to create a nation that at the end of the day it's gonna help us like eliminate these I don't know barriers into economic barriers also like these I don't know public or governance like uh papers that we need to handle sometimes, right? Eh, is there a way to do that? And if so, how can we preserve, of course, like our own identity while trying to create something bigger as a I don't know, a different nation or you know?
Yes, for sure. Thank you so much. That's a very insightful and complex question. I think that achieving unity across North America is very complex, but obviously a very idealistic goal as it would kind of help the region foster a greater sense of belonging. I think you mentioned economically. I personally think that like increasing those free trade principles and um, really helping to foster the economies in all three countries would be very beneficial. I know we've had that in the past, but like perhaps steering ourselves more towards that goal, especially like Mexico. I think this would really help the United States, like help Mexico's economy as well. I think politically and socially, it's very difficult because, like you said, you have to strike this balance between preserving cultural identities in certain areas, but also encouraging almost like a shared identity. I think perhaps like one way to achieve this goal would be more towards fostering like curiosity and sharing of cultural values, because then we're not diminishing cultural values, but instead we're more learning from each other. I know like places where I've just been in spheres where there's like very little talk about shared cultural values, but instead fostering those conversations would allow people like me to learn more about shared cultural values without diminishing the importance of certain ones. But I definitely think that's like a very tricky balance, especially when we look at policies that can be implemented. but just overall having like a greater understanding that like our countries are all next to each other and that cooperation rather than hostility would be best for everyone.
Well, yeah, I believe so, and thank you so very much. And then, if you don't mind, me, I ask, in a, I guess, in a smaller way, in a personal way, what it would be like a path to begin trying to create, well, this new connection or even empathy towards other nations. Because at the end of the day, being completely honest, I'm being Mexican, I don't even know sometimes like what is going on with my own politics, and I believe it's kind of hard for everyone to be informed in regards as we have multiple things to do, or even it's not even it can even be like something that is not interesting in a way that you feel curiosity about it, right? So how can we foster that at least in the personal level?
Yeah, for sure. I think on the personal level, a lot of this education unfortunately sometimes just falls on the self. I think like general habits that allow us to understand the greater worldview, like reading the news, listening to the news, even talking to our family and friends about big issues can help us foster these connections on the most personal level while also understanding other cultures. I think even like slightly broader, looking at our educational institutions, ensuring that they're offering um, like I know at my university, just a variety of courses and speakers and connections across cultures is very important. And in general, I think this would help the collective understanding, sometimes even more than the national policies would, because it would allow each person to develop their own thinking of how our cultures interact and the best way to go about this. Well, I know it's not like a perfect answer. I think that's one approach.
Thank you so very much. Appreciate it. Yeah.
Maybe I think what you just said and what Sophia was saying, and we've heard it in a little bit in the other talks, is what this foundation is trying to do with these meetings of top leaders, top student leaders in North America. That we're just going to keep doing these congresses, and we're going to spread the news. We're going to share your own conversations. We're going to really try to seek topics that are of high interest to you, and that's our goal. And we want our community of learning and of dialogue discovery to grow like a snowball. And that what you just summed up with Iran was really why we're here. So at this time, thank you. We're going to have the talk by Hitesh ready, and he is going to talk to us, okay, about the nationalism, patriotism, solidarity from a Canadian point of view. Hitesh is a student at the University of Saskatchewan.
Hello, sir. Thank you for the opportunity. And I think my video has been disabled. Uh, Firstly, I would like to thank Theodore Wells and the foundation for this valuable opportunity and all the panelists. This has been an enlightening experience for me. So, when I first arrived in Canada a long time ago, I remember seeing different expressions of Canada. One was on Canada Day, where we saw flags, fireworks, and celebration. The other was in the classroom, university classrooms, where we studied residential schools, settler colonialism, structural inequality, and state power. I remember thinking, how can both these uh, ideas be true at the same time? So the question, the tension between the pride and critique sits at the heart of how many of formed in the contemporary Western education understand nationalism, patriotism, and solidarity today. Today, as we ask the question, what does a nationalism, patriotism, and solidarity means formed within a contemporary Western educational framework? Not what they meant in 1867, not what they meant in 1950, but what they mean to students shaped by reconciliation, multicultural policy, anti-racism frameworks, global human rights language, and institutional accountability. Traditionally, nationalism means identification with the primary community. But contemporary education trains us differently. We are taught to ask who are included in the nation, who are excluded, whose land formed the nation, who bear national myths. So nationalism today becomes morally conditional. For many young Canadians, nationalism is acceptable only if it is civic, not ethnic, pluralist, not assimilist, accountable, not mythic. This is not the rejection of the idea of Canada, it's the refusal to romanticize it. So, patriotism used to mean emotional attachment country. But among students today, patriotism increasingly means something else. It means defending democratic institutions. It means protecting minority rights. It means insisting on reconciliation efforts. It's demanding transparency. It means demanding accountability. It is less about Canada is the best country in the world and more about Canada must live up to its principles. This is closer to what political theorists refer to as constitutional patriotism, loyalty to democratic norms rather than cultural supremacy. It is pride filtered through accountability. Solidarity. If nationalism is conditional and patriotism is reflective, then solidarity becomes the central. Solidarity answers a different question, not who we are, but what do we owe one another? For many students, solidarity means standing with the indigenous sovereignty movements, supporting public health care and social safety nets, advocating for racial and gender equity, defending refugees and climate justice. Solidarity is the ethical belonging. It is less about heritage and more about the obligation. So there is a paradox here. Solidarity requires institutions, and institutions require legitimacy. Legitimacy requires shared identity. You cannot redistribute without cohesion. You cannot reconcile without a shared framework. You cannot sustain democracy without some sense of we. So, uh, even the most critically formed citizens still depend on the nation state. So, we critique nationalism, but we rely on its structure. Contemporary Western education produce anti-national citizens. It produces self-conscious citizens, citizens who are aware of power structures, who resist uncritical myths, value pluralism, see inclusion as a. This is civic maturation, but this maturation creates tension because critique is easier than cohesion. So the Canadian model, Canada is uniquely positioned here. Unlike other nation states built on ethnic homogeneity, Canada's official identity includes multiculturalism, bilingualism, and the reconciliation commitments. This creates a civic where belonging is legal and institutional, not ancestral. That means national identity is constantly negotiated, not inherited. So the deepen. So what do these terms mean today? Nationalism becomes a framework that must prove its inclusivity. Patriotism becomes a commitment to democratic integrity, and solidarity ethical test of whether belonging translates into justice. So the real question is not are we proud? Is it about are we worthy of the pride? So I began with two images, the fireworks on the Canada Day and the classroom critique of our history. Perhaps the mature form of civic identity is not choosing one over the other. Perhaps it is holding both celebration and responsibility, belonging and accountability, identity and justice. The contemporary young Canadians is not post-national; they're post-naivety, and that's the strongest foundation for democracy in the 21st century. I would like to thank once again North American Educational Initiatives Foundation and Sir Theodore Wills for this valuable opportunity. Thank you.
Yes, that was a wonderful presentation. You really distilled the issues in a way I've never seen before, and it was very illuminating to me. And
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm very curious to get the reactions of the other participants and panelists to your talk about Canadian perspectives according to a contemporary critical perspective. Here we got some applause coming in. Who would like to follow up with questions for Hitesh? Do we have a hand up? Any questions right now?
I have a question.
Thank you, Pedro.
I was
Would you show your screen? Thank you.
in a moment. Well, thank you very much for the presentation. I think it's really interesting to all of us to learn about the contemporary perspective of young Canadian, because in my humble opinion, I think we all admire the model of Canada, the way of living of the Canadians. But I was thinking that, do you think it's possible to replicate this education of contemporary thinking in Mexico, for example? I say this because we all know how Canada was created as a nation. And I don't know if this could be possible in a country like Mexico, where we have a very complex history. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, so one thing I have noticed is Canada has a very unique culture. So when you think of United States, it is said as a melt of cultures. But Canada is not a melting pot, it's a mosaic of cultures. So you see all different ethnicities, especially because I think Quebec had a huge role to play in the given their French origin and their linguistic pride. From the very starting, when the foundation of this nation, they have always demanded that we are tolerant towards multiculturalism and multiple ethnicities. And this, coupled by our commitments to the indigenous people, we have a strong indigenous governance system within the country, uh, apart from the federal governance structure. So this has created a very unique governance system that would be, I think, it would be tough to replicate in most other societies anywhere. So that's, I don't know if that answers the question. I have through Mexico or studied it in depth to exactly compare it in relative to Mexican governance structure, but generally I think it's a very unique structure that they have here.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Pedro. Who else has a question for Hitesh?
Hey, oh, let's see. Is my Oh, there we go. Hey, really awesome job. I enjoyed your presentation. I was kind of just curious, are you going to be at Freedom Week in Canada? There, I know there's McGill Hill University where they're doing that.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm not going to be there. It's I live in Saskatchewan, so it's unfortunately I'm not going to be there, but it's going to be costing.
Thank
Thank you
you
so
again.
much.
You did an amazing job.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tesh. That was wonderful. And now we're going to proceed with Sergio um, Villegas Thornton, and he's going to talk about the critical contemporary perspective from the point of view of Mexico.
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. First of all,
Can you
while
put
I
can you get a light on your face somehow, Sergio?
let me change the angle.
Thank you.
Okay.
Wonderful.
So better.
Perfect. Perfect.
Thank you, and wanna thank about these spaces for dialogue. I think it's pretty important in order to achieve more knowledge and more comprehension about these complicated topics. So just let me share my screen. Just let me. It's visible, my screen. Yes. Thank you. Well, my talk asks a simple question. Well, an in appearance simple question, and that is: how do Mexican citizens educated within contemporary critical Western frameworks understand and differentiate nationalism, patriotism, and solidarity? Well, the key point is that while these citizens often embrace cosmopolitan ethics and decolonial critics, yet they still live inside national cultures saturated with everyday symbols and everyday symbols that quietly reproduce attachment and sense of belonging to Mexico. And that this everyday reproductions is what Michael Billings says, calls as banal nationalism. And we have like 2 points to view. It's the first one from Benedict Anderson that says that nations are imagined communities. It's like a legal fiction maintained through shared narratives, media, and institutions rather than primordial facts. And so, in other words, Mexico is intersubject cultural construction. And second of all, Michael Billings, like I said before, with his banal nationalisms, says that daily cues, headlines contrasting Mexicans with foreigners, with flags and ceremonies, sport coverage, and this constantly flags and this shows makes a normalize belonging to a nation and to this construction. On the normative side, Martha Nussbaum contrasts patriotism with cosmopolitanism. She warns that patriotic pride can slide into moral blindness and argues from primary allegiance to humanity. That's useful for analyzing how interviews like I made posteriorly elevate solidarity beyond borders while trying to keep a version of patriotism compatible with justice. And to illustrate this point, I will say that we can see this contradiction when a catastrophe occurs in other country, or when we saw a nation committing a crime in another nation, and not to put names and which one makes to another, but um, a population can sense or feel solidarity to the victim. Critical, well, critical education, like I said before, it's a key point to reconcile these confronted points, and that's why it's important to get focused in it. And I got to say, Paulo Freire aims to a concept that he says it's conscientização, that it's learning to name and transform the concept of domination, and it's get visible that domination of the roles in the classroom, in this role of the teacher and the learner. If education works as a phrase suggests, it should reshape how people define these political terms and how they act civically. In Latin America, in specific Mexico, the colonial thinkers add more tools like Quijano's coloniality of power and names that long-lasting matrix of race, labor, knowledge, and authority created during conquest. On other hand, Walter Mignon proposed the linking from that matrix, and Enrique Dussel, advances a philosophy of liberation and transmodernity beyond Eurocentric universal values. And like I said, in other words, it's the go beyond solidarity in an individual way and try to go beyond borders. To localize this, I draw on Claudio Lumnitz, who shows how Mexico's national space and public sphere were historically constructed and how contemporary nationalism reveals fissures and contradictions. Like I said before, and with a question, the patriotism, the sense of belonging, can contrast with the solidarity beyond borders. So, Lomnitz um, says that this contradiction can reconcile a través via mestiza and cross-border identities. So we need to get a more global identity and sense of the humanity. And like I said, I make some interviews, and this is how I get to them. I use a qualitative interpretative design with semi-structured interviews of university-educated Mexican citizens who reported sustained exposure to critical frameworks and critical theory, the colonial studies, or critical pedagogy. The interviews guide asked them to define nation and distinguish nationalism from patriotism and describes solidarity. It proved educational influence, emotional experience of pride or discomfort, media, ritual effects, global moral connections, and borderlands or hybrid identities. This was analyzed abductively with sensitive concepts from the frameworks I just named. First, respondents tend to reject nationalism when it's associated with exclusion, nativism, or mythic narratives. They critique essentialized stories of nation and point to inequalities, echoing the colonial attentives to race and hierarchy. Second, they reframe patriotism as civic and ethical commitment, support for democratic practice, public accountability, and social rights within Mexico rather than ethnic pride. And that's how we can encounter again, find again that contradiction, like I said before. This is a kind of critical patriotism compatible with global ethics, resonant with Nussbaum's call keep to patriotism, tethered to universalized principles. Third, they elevate solidarity as transnational ethic horizon, linking Mexican struggles to global ones with the transborder identity. And well, we have Mexican borns in practically all over the world. Here, Freire clarifies how education nurtures and language of collective emancipation, while Dussel gives it philosophical grounding as a solidarity with the oppressed beyond borders. But the story isn't pure cosmopolitanism. Banal nationalism persists. People report emotional peaks when we go to a sports show like football or the Independence Day. Those events increase that feeling of belonging and that patriotic sense. That doesn't contradict their critical stance. It shows a dual anchoring and cosmopolitan in moral principles, yet pragmatically patriotic when working for local change. But the interpretation I interpretate this as hybrid positioning rather than inconsistencies. People trained in critical frameworks link from exclusionary nationalism, retain a critical patriotism to improve institutions at home and expand solidarity to global scales. Anderson and Billings explains why the nation remains salient. Nussbaum articulates the ethical ceiling of patriotism. Freire, Quijano, Mignol, and Dussel show why solidarity often carries the colonial content, and Lobnis Plus and Saldúa help us see the Mexican and borderland textures that produce ambivalence as a political resource. Solidarity emerged as a concept that extends beyond national borders and resonates strongly with the colonial thought. Participants described solidarity as an ethical orientation toward global justice issues such as immigration, racial inequality, climate change, and human rights. These conceptions align with Dusserl's ethics of liberation, which foregrounds the experience of oppressed peoples worldwide. Respondents often linked their sense of solidarity to educational experience that exposed them to structural critiques of global capitalism, colonial histories, and transnational movements. Freire's influence was evident in the framing of solidarity as both reflective and action-oriented, grounded in dialogically engagement with marginalized communities. A central interpretive finding is that critical educated Mexican citizens developed hybrid identities characterized by cosmopolitan ethics and commitments paired with pragmatic patriotic engagement. And for civic education, we should teach the difference between nationalism and patriotism and model a patriotism anchored in democratic practice and rights. Pair this media literacy about every flagging so citizens can name the subtle cues shaping affect. So that's how I interpret these three concepts and the conclusion I get. Thank you.
Sergio. Sergio.
Yeah.
Okay, you can see people are applauding.
Thank you.
Where's my face? I'm looking for my face. Sergio.
Yeah.
There I am. Very profound. I'm going to need to reread that. It was very good and very profound.
Thank you.
Profound. So, do we have any questions for Sergio at this time for that excellent presentation? So let's go on. I'm sorry, because we're over time, and not because of any problem with Sergio's talk. I'm gonna ask Mita to go ahead with the question about number 10, which is a very difficult question about finding shared values. Is there any hope of finding shared values? Go ahead, Mita.
Hi, Ted. Thank you so much for giving me the second opportunity to speak in the Congress. Very excited to talk about shared values amidst differences in Western and Indigenous ideologies. So I will share my screen now. One second. Is it visible?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So today I want to talk about something that's very important. That is the shared values between Indigenous and Western frameworks. So growing up, I lived in India and then I moved here when I was 15 years old. But I was born here. We moved back to India and then I came back here my first or second year of high school. And just knowing the differences between cultures, I could tell that civil discourse and just talking freely about different perspectives and cultures wasn't really open because sometimes, more often than not, people do become oblivious or are ignorant to perspectives. So we really need to look at how, despite differences between Indigenous and Western frameworks, how we can go past that and actually look at what the shared values that we have. So first I want to talk about like why we want or why we need civil discourse. So even though Indigenous and Western traditions come from very different historical experiences and very different understandings of reality, they are really not as disconnected as we think they are. And that is because if you look closely, both places have a strong emphasis on community, on the idea that we don't exist individually, but we are made from community. And on the idea that people aren't isolated individuals, they depend on their family, on their friends, and on their community to gather their identity. And it carries real weight and authority, and it is a source of meaning, identity, and guidance as well. So when you recognize these shared commitments between the Western world and then the Indigenous world, it becomes easier to see how they provide common ground, and it doesn't necessarily erase the disagreements or erase historical wounds, but it opens us to more open discourse so that we can actually discuss perspectives without establishing a superiority complex. So first, I want to talk about human beings in relation. So if we begin with many Indigenous frameworks, one of the first things that we notice is that identity is not understood as something purely individual. Identity is rooted in kinship. So in most Indigenous places, we can see that they find their identity in the form of family, clan, tribe. It's something that's interconnected. It's like interconnected web of relationships. So who you are is inseparable from where you come from and who you belong to. That is just the basis of it. And there's also a deep sense of responsibility that flows from that identity. So there's just responsibility to ancestors whose lives and sacrifices influenced their lives and their future generation lives. So that's how we see that community takes precedence over individuality. The self is always embedded within something larger. So not only in Indigenous ways do we see this, like the disregard of isolation, but we also see it in the Western world. Um, Aristotle begins from a surprisingly similar assumption in Nicomachean Ethics. So for Aristotle, virtue is excellence of character, and it does not develop in isolation. You need people to become the best version of yourself, and that comes from community. So in books 8 and 9, he argues that friendship is essential to human flourishing, and it's not optional or sentimental. It is central to living well. And I actually explored this in my previous Congress, in our previous Congress, where I talked about how he means that a shared life of virtue is a lived relationship with other people. So for him, for Aristotle, you cannot become good alone. Moral growth requires others. And this is the key overlap because both indigenous frameworks and Aristotle reject radical individualism, which means that both human beings aren't just isolated at their core. And that overlap matters because civil discourse and real dialogue only works if we believe that we belong to each other in a community in some meaningful way, and if we understand ourselves as connected. And when we do that, solidarity becomes possible. So that is one of the shared values. Next, I want to talk about moral order beyond preference. So the second shared value goes even deeper. Both traditions assume that morality is not just a matter of personal opinion. It's not simply, this is true for me, but maybe not for you. Instead, there's a sense that moral truth has weight. In many indigenous worldviews, the goal is harmony rather than domination. Living well means maintaining balance and not asserting control. We see the same thing with Aristotle, especially in Book 5. He makes a distinction between what he calls conventional justice and natural justice. And in other words, things are just or unjust regardless of what a particular society decides. So justice isn't purely invented. Rather than justice being subjective, it is objective. And when we hold ourselves to that standard of justice being the same for everyone, we can actually start involving in civil discourse without, comparing injustices and comparing whose problems are worse than the others by making sure that justice is objective. And that is discovered by Aristotle. So then we can talk about John Courtney Murray in We Hold These Truths. So he argues that American democracy only works if citizens believe that there's a moral law accessible to human reason. So as I said, morality cannot be subjective. If it is just a preference of power. Then discourse turns into a struggle to dominate rather than an effort to speak truth and just acknowledge the perspectives and the struggles of other cultures as well. Talking about tradition and sacred narrative. So the third shared value is tradition, and this is where Dawson and Bella become especially helpful because in Religion and Culture, Dawson says religion is the deeper vision that shapes a civilization's sense of purpose. And according to him, every civilization is grounded in a sacred vision, a set of ultimate beliefs about reality and meaning that hold everyone together. So, in those traditions in which we see indigenous traditions, they aren't myths. Like some Western perspectives are that indigenous traditions or indigenous values are myths, but that is far from the truth. They aren't myths. They explain where people come from, how they are meant to live, how they want to live life. So this is very important because then we start to acknowledge what indigenous people actually come from or where they come from and what they want to do, how they want to live their lives by acknowledging that their culture isn't just a myth. So then Bella in The Broken Covenant applies a similar insight. So he argues that United States has what we call a civil religion, a shared set of moral symbols, narratives, and commitments that give the nation a sense of purpose. So if Western world can have a civil religion or this rule book of what we consider moral and what we consider is a narrative that we believe in, so can indigenous frameworks. And that acceptance is extremely crucial for good civil discourse. So both indigenous and Western traditions recognize that identity is not something we invent from scratch. It is formed through inherited meaning, through shared stories, through ancestors, and recognizing that shared understanding of tradition helps create common ground for dialogue and civil discourse. So, limits on power. So, from an indigenous perspective, one of the deepest critiques is that Western powers often failed to live up to their own moral principles. So, Murray insists that state authority is not absolute, it is limited by moral law. The government must answer to standards of justice that stand above it. Power that serves itself rather than justice is corrupt. And across these thinkers, Aristotle, Murray, Bella, we see the shared conviction. Power must answer to something higher. It must be accountable to justice. As I said, justice should be objective rather than subjective. And at the same time, we have to add an important nuance. Shared values do not erase historical injustice. Just because we can have civil discourse, knowing that there are more similarities to Western and Indigenous perspectives than there are differences, and we can understand their perspectives, apply these philosophies to make sure that justice is served, doesn't mean that we forget the historical injustice inflicted on both worlds. So this is just civil discourse, and the purpose of it is to acknowledge these justices and moving forward, not repeat the same mistakes that we have historically. So I want to say that stepping back, the main point is that even with deep historical and philosophical differences, Indigenous and Western traditions share foundational commitments. Both affirm that we belong to communities, that moral truth is more than personal preference, that tradition shapes identities, and that power must be accountable to justice. Civil discourse becomes possible when we erase the differences, when we recognize that we share deeper convictions about what it means to live well together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. May that was awesome, and people are applauding your talk. Given the time constraints, I hope you don't mind that we're not going to have questions at this time. We're going to go right to Rebecca Trafardi, and because she has a pending meeting. And I apologize, Maida, that we will not have questions for your talk at this time. We could have them at the end, okay?
Yeah, perfect.
Thank you. And here she is. Thank you, Rebecca, for standing by.
No, thank you for giving me the opportunities. Trying to see how I can share my screen. It's not allowing me to. Okay, can you see it?
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect. So, hi everyone. My name is Rebecca Trifari, and thank you for the opportunity to be here today. Today, I will give a presentation on whether students with different values can come together in service of others and how this collaboration can realistically take place. First of all, I'll give a brief introduction about my academic background. I'm an Italian student from Rome, Italy, and I spent my first 2 years of high school in an Italian high school before transferring to the International Baccalaureate, which is the IB diploma that gave me a global perspective, made me learn multiple languages. And then I spent my first year of college in Boston before transferring to NYU, where I'm currently focusing on creative writing and astrophysics. And I'm graduating a year early with the class of 2027, and I'm currently studying abroad at NYU London for a semester. Yeah. Okay, when working with people with different values, I notice there are usually the same type of challenges that students encounter, and there are multiple preconceptions and prejudices, especially if people are from different backgrounds. It's very easy to stereotype and have a set idea in mind of what a person from a specific nationality should act or look, which is the first obstacle to having an efficient environment to work in. And due to these ideas, international students feel often scared to speak up, feel pressure, and may compare themselves to domestic students in American universities. It's also very common to have misunderstandings and language barriers, as well as difficulty adapting to a new environment and rules that they may have not heard before coming to the United States. The most important one, I think, is that students with different values will also have different ideas on what constitutes working efficiently, because some students might prioritize speed and directness, other ones may prioritize reflection, consensus, but these challenges do not necessarily make collaboration impossible, but it means that it requires intention from the students' part. To overcome them, students need awareness of each other's background and context. They must establish boundaries and mutual respect. And it's also very important that the university helps them to achieve this. They have to teach students how to separate critique of ideas from critique of identity. And it's important to practice humility, because students coming from different backgrounds, maybe in their country, they were used to being top of their class or top of their school. But when coming to the United States, they are also meeting other people that were top of their class or top of their school. So they have to learn how to learn from each other in a sense without defending their position every time. So it's important to have curiosity over defensiveness, because this can transform disagreement into learning. And most importantly, what universities should focus on is defining a clear and concrete shared goal, allowing students to focus on that impact rather than their ideology, so reminding them that they have a shared goal. Here I have an example with the differences I noticed with Italian and American universities, for example. In Italy, universities tend to have a focus on more ancient traditions, history, philosophy, and classical texts, while in the United States, they are more open to modern issues. They promote individual voice, and there's not really that much on teaching on ancient history or global literatures, unless the student specifically wants to study that for their major or for their own personal knowledge. In Italy, there's more of a conservative culture, and if students have controversial ideas, they're often encouraged to keep that outside the universities and not speak up on them. In the United States, it's the opposite, because there's freedom of expression, and in classroom settings, the students are always encouraged to speak up, have original thoughts. Another difference is the focus on memorization, because when working on a project in Italy, it's often recommended that students memorize from texts, and then for their exams, they have to go there and show as much as they can remember for what they read. While the United States has a more original approach, they tend to make students reflect on what they're doing, making them write essays, reflections, or doing research. And lastly, there is in Italy less focus on participation, debates, and creativity, while in the United States, that's one of the main components of work. And the effect is that, for example, Italian students may feel scared to speak up, since they were taught that different ideas should be hidden. And since they are never been in the United States and they have such a different context growing up, they are not sure whether their ideas would be accepted there. So they struggle with projects that require directness, original thought, and collaboration. This was also my experience at first, because people were having different ideas from mine. And instead of speaking up, I didn't know what to do. So I tend to keep those ideas for myself. And then over time, only I understood how it worked in the United States. Now, looking at this in a broader context, so in general, international students, regardless of a specific country, they're usually already exposed to the idea of global, even just taking a lot of them take the IB diploma, for example, or simply by being aware of the fact that they are going to study in a different country. But domestic students perceive internationals are fundamentally different, and that's where stereotypes emerge, and it's hard to work together on something because international students tend to isolate themselves and continue to form social circles based on shared nationality or language or values. So we see how national identity continues to influence how students choose their communities and how they approach work. Of course, living together in the same environment and just working are two separate things because realistically, I don't think everyone could ever be able to fully go beyond differences as a whole, unfortunately. But it is important that communication starts at least with working together. And I wanted to add this quote that says significant numbers of international students in the US report feeling alienated, with 88% reporting a decreased sense of belonging and 30% facing significant cultural barriers, according to Stop AAPI Hate Survey. A 2019 survey found 31% experienced discrimination based on nationality and 41% struggled to form friendships with domestic peers. So this suggests that coexistence alone is not enough because this true collaboration requires intentional inclusion, support, and a willingness for both sides to make to move beyond comfort zones. And it's important to notice that while, for example, 31% and 41% may look like lower statistics, 88% of students reporting a decreased sense of belonging is very important to look at because probably the remaining percentage of students were simply not feeling that because maybe they found people from the same country that they became friends with. But I don't think necessarily there is still a situation, or maybe it's very rare, where students were able to fully adapt at first. So I think other than the students putting in the effort, universities should be the main way students can efficiently learn how to work together, not simply with brief presentations that they may give during orientation week, but with a continuous effort and meeting with students that come from different backgrounds to remind them that they have a shared goal. Because if communication fails at universities, it fails everywhere. But if it succeeds here, it may become a model for the future, which I think is very important. Thank you.
Rebecca, thank you so much for staying a little bit longer
Thank you.
to give your I'm sure that everybody in the audience and the panel want to offer their I don't know, their a big hug, un abrazo in Espanol, okay? And maybe through this community of speakers, you are going to be joining the foundation as a member of our steering committee. So maybe within the steering committee, you might find some new online friends. And we certainly want whatever percentage you are, all right, to go up of belongingness. Iram Mahmoud has a question for you.
Not really a question, but well, talking about like this belonging feeling and creating like a community, do we have like sort of a WhatsApp group or something that we can communicate through? I guess that would be helpful for all of us if we want to stay connected, I guess.
I think, Iram, that's a great idea. I think we'll have to make it voluntary, but I think we can do that. Let me talk to let's spin the idea around with the group. But while we have Rebecca here, we really do want to thank her very much. But it's a shame. That's a good idea. We're going to follow up. It's a shame. Does anybody have a question for Rebecca? Oh, we got her. How many languages can you speak, Rebecca?
Fluently, I can speak 4.
What? Which ones?
Italian, English, Spanish, and French.
Very good. Not Latin?
I studied it, but of course I'm not fluent in
Come on, you
it.
gotta get good on that. Get that Latin, huh?
Exactly.
And then you could give us a tour of the Colosseum.
Perfect.
Wonderful. Should I say ciao, baby? No,
Sì,
ciao, Bella.
ciao.
Ciao,
Sorry.
Bella.
Thank you so much again.
Thank you. We'll be in touch.
Perfect.
And the next talk will be by, we're not going to have a break. Next talk will be by Patrick Oba. Shared Values in the United States. Patrick?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I won't be able to share my screen, but my video is not showing. So I think President, you can, give me access to share, my camera. Can you hear me? Hello? Hello?
Yes, I just pushed the button for you to share your screen.
No, I won't be able to share my screen, but I can show my, my face on the
Good.
camera. Is that okay? Can you see me?
Yes.
Can you see me? Because I'm not seeing anybody or whatever. I don't know what happened. Hello?
Yes.
I don't know if, can you see
Ricardo,
me?
can you help? Are you able to begin, Patrick?
Yeah, I can start, but I'm not okay. Today is my presentation is giving the difference between classical or tradition and the contemporary critical interpretation of culture and the history in the United States. What shared value can be identified? Because there is people we call classical or traditional people, and then the group of contemporary and critical and critical. So they coexist in the United States, but classical traditional has been there for decades, for almost the time the US started. Even I would say during the colonization and the post-colonialism, there is already there classical and the traditional thinkers. But here, I'm trying to, give some several core civic and the ethical value tend to be affirmed in both classical, traditional, and the contemporary critical interpretation of US culture and the history, even when they are sharply disagree in some of the issues and the topic about how well the nation have lived up with them. I'm going to narrate this. So in these two group of people in the United States, I will share their civic ideas. Then when we talk about liberty, freedom, both narrative place high importance on individual freedom like speech, religion, association, and the movement. Though classical account emphasize protection and the celebration of existing freedom. But in the other way around, the critical, that is contemporary group account, stress that uneven application and the need to expand them to marginalized group. So when we see that the the classical or the tradition are just trying to be fair in some certain things, like in the they believe that everybody have the freedom of speech, the freedom of religion. You can't deprive anyone anything about speech and the religion. So they have to express their freedom because we are no longer with the colonization. America is free to everybody as American. You are free to identify himself or herself in a way he like, especially allow people to be free, to have a freedom of speech and the religion and worship whoever they want to worship. So now another shared civic ideas they have, these two groups, are equality as a standard. So when we talk about equality, the classical narrative often highlight legal equality. They believe that everybody are equal and they have a formal right, human right in everything. But when we talk of critical or contemporary group, their narrative is highlighting structural inequality and the exclusion. But however, they do so precisely because equality is accepted as a legitimate benchmark for judging American institutions. So when we talk about this equality of a thing, like the criticism that come nowadays is that we see people like LGBTQ people wants to identify themselves and want their opinion to be heard. They think, oh, we are human beings. There is no way we can say there is no equality, because maybe somebody, the same-sex couple or a transgender, people who are not into that, aspect. We believe that if you transition a man become a woman, that is not equal to, the men gender. So these are the things that are creating issues nowadays. And then sometimes we believe, before in the classical or tradition, they believe that women don't have rights at all in anything, and they can't rule the country. They cannot do anything because they are women. So if you go to biblical or religious aspect of it, theologically, when we talk about equality, people view it as Jesus Christ is, lead the 12 apostles and they hand them over the power to lead the world, to go and they preach the gospel. So in that aspect, and then they said, oh, Jesus Christ himself did not bring woman with him to lead or to go and preach the gospel. And then they believe. So if you go to Catholic Church today, you will see that the women are not accepting to be a priest. They are not accepting to be a priest. It's only men. And then they are instigating, they are trying to see if there will be some kind of women ordination in the Catholic priesthood. So which the Pope are not trying to accept. So these are the things. If you go to, and then the Catholic Church are rooted back in the first century. Even the Christ left, and then the apostle took over. So they refer back to that. They are not accepting women. So these are the classical or traditional aspect of it. So, but when we talk about contemporary issue now, you see that the people are striving, even in the Catholic Church, to have women ordination and all those priestly ordination, which they are not trying to accept. But other denominations, they allow, like Anglican Church or any other group, they allow women to get involved as a religious leader in their denominations, but only Catholic didn't accept it. So nowadays, even in some country, find it difficult that women cannot get involved as a political leader, it still exists because I'm an African. Even from where I came from, I'm a Nigerian. We haven't had any women president, but in some state in Nigeria, women have become governors and they get in the senatorial positions, but they cannot lead the country or be a commander-in-chief of our country. Even in the United States here, the least I can say is that a woman has become a vice president, and then in other way around, governor, governor of the state, women have become, in some places, become a governor. So these are the things that I'm trying to elaborate. There are some advantage and the disadvantage of it, but I think in some group of, the feminist group, they believe that, okay, a woman can do whatever man do. So these are things that we are trying to, I'm trying to narrate, like contemporary group of people trying to push hard for equality. So when another civic ideas that the classical tradition and the contemporary critical are sharing are democracy and the popular sovereignty. He said both sides affirm that the government derive its authority from the people. So they have this common ideal. And that the broad participation and the representation are normatively desirable, even as they disagree over how democratic US Constitution actually are and whose voices have been silenced. So now, because America is like a country that are most diverse in the whole world, so they practice democracy. But in terms of that democracy, there are Republicans who are conservative, and then there are Democratic who are not conservative. So these are, but we still live in these are two political parties that live inside America, where the country are being declared as a democratic nation. So you see that it's always a problem, because people that engage in classic and traditional way of life, we find it difficult to exist where they practice full democracy. So sometimes you see that the Democratic Party, you can't blame them because of how the country are being formulated during after the colonialism, the post-colonialism. They have the first president, and then the constitution that was established at that time. So now I have to go to shared commitment about the political order. So when we talk about rule of law and the constitutionalism, traditional narrative stress, that is traditional or classical narrative, narratives stress reverence for the constitution and the legal continuity, but critical or contemporary narrative invoke the same constitutional and the legal ideals to argue for reform. That is what the critical want to do. They want to argue for reform, reinterpretation of the constitution, or fuller inclusion, indicating a shared belief that law and the constitution principle should be constrained power. Then when we talk about belief in right, both approach affirm that individuals possess fundamental right, civil, political, sometimes social, that state and the society ought to respect, even as they disagree over which right have priority and how they have been historically denied. So which is good in this aspect because both both group are try to coexist in a human right, which is so essential in any country. And nowadays, what is going on is a lot of things going on nowadays. There is no human right in some certain places. People don't listen to others because they are poor, because they come from so tribe. But in terms of here, I have seen in some places, whatever, like, I don't know, but I will just have experience of this because I live in that side, like American Indians. So it seems like sometimes they will believe that they don't have right or America are not treating them right. So I'm trying to figure out when I was in Arizona, I feel like that America is not like that to exclude anyone or strip anybody his or her right. So, but this is how they feel, American Indians, those that live in a Navajo area.
Excuse
So
me,
when we talk
Patrick.
about, yes, is my time up?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, sorry. Okay.
No, it was wonderful. Now listen, all of these talks, we're going to want people to send it to us, okay?
Okay,
And
no problem.
right now we're going to go, because of the lack of time, I'm going to have Emmanuel. Please try to keep your thing. We're going to be just asking you to do a 10-minute talk, but remember that we're going to, we want your presentation. Okay? Thank you, Emmanuel.
I don't think he's still online. Is he online still, or he step out? He should step out, I think so.
I still see him in the participant list.
I think he step out. For my own side, if you have any question, you can put it in a chat. I can respond. Yes, I can respond to any question you have about my own
So
presentation.
Konstantinos, why don't you go ahead?
Give me one moment. Hey. Okay. Let me get my presentation loaded up real quick.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Share. Okay. I'm just blind. Let's see. Okay. Let's see. All right. Can y'all see my presentation?
Yes.
Okay. Awesome. Okay. So today, I have a similar topic to everyone else, kind of diving into the nature of like, if we can like share over values with people that hold different values than us as students. I decided to approach this from a little bit of a different perspective. I really wanted to dive into the kind of authoritarian nature of society itself, how that manifests throughout our society, the history of it, well, history, how it manifests, and then how we can kind of use understanding of both of those topics to build communication with people that we don't necessarily agree with, or just in general across cultural and social lines. I'm a student at Arizona State University, majoring in history with aiming for a minor in philosophy and sociology. So, the thesis of my discussion today is that it's not only possible for students of varying backgrounds and values to collaborate on issues, but also essential to protect civil society. The function of a healthy and prosperous society is built by the free exchange of ideas and ideals. Protection of civil society is achieved through education about the history of authoritarian society, the nature of social groups' authoritarian impulses used to silence dissent, and any form of any form of perceived social deviancy and how the rejection of these impulses helps build a free and prosperous society. And then kind of how that plays into us as students. So a very brief overview of all of recorded human history. So I've got my timeline here. So we've got the Iron and Bronze Age until the modern era. Really, truly, in the grand scheme of things, and the scheme of how long the universe has been around, human history before recorded history, freedom is a very, very new concept. It's not really been around for that long. The free exchange of ideas, free market of ideas, democracy itself, at least in its more pure form today, it has not been around for all that long at all. All- in 430 BC, we had the first mentions of democratic society, although be it very flawed. Julius Caesar's establishment of the Roman Empire. Uh, fast forward all the way to 1775 through 83. We have the American Revolution, and then finally the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991. Um, we're here at the very end, Yellow Star, 2026. So really, in the grand scheme of things, from say the 1865, when we actually really started to get closer to perfecting our democratic institutions and respecting the rights of everyone, freedom is new. So my argument is that humans are inherently authoritarian, whether we realize it or not. It's very ingrained in our culture, our history, society, really just our being. Um, it's something that we as people, if we want to be constructive and build healthy societies, we have to acknowledge these impulses and move past them and evolve culturally. We have to evolve past these primal instincts. Um, this dives into the concept of group mentality and conformity versus nonconformity, deviancy, uh, enemies, or perceived enemies, I should say, and the destruction of civil liberties that come with this. So, social order and authoritarian impulses. Societies are obviously, as we know, organized into various groups of people. And within our society in particular, you have various different social groups. Keep in mind, this is a very brief overview of sociological theory in this, with deviancy. But essentially, so in the slide that's being projected right now, we're talking about, say, a party. So the upper leadership of the party social group um, determines the outlook of the group. Now, obviously, there's some back and forth overlay, exchange of ideas, but essentially, what is said at the top, what is said by the particular social group is accepted as truth, at least most of the time. What we run into is people don't always agree. People dissent. People think that, maybe we should look at things from another perspective. Now, this is an absolute healthy and essential feature of our free societies. However, unfortunately, what happens more often than not, as we'll see in the next slide, they're labeled as deviants, enemies to freedom, enemies to the group. In America, we very often see people who oppose conflict and certain unsavory activities, such as racism, bigotry, things like the civil rights movement in particular, where groups that try to fight for these rights and speak out against injustice are labeled as deviants and dangerous aspects of society. They're accosted from society, ostracized, I should say. So this is something that happens in every single society. It happens in every single group. Whether we really want to admit it about ourselves or not, I'm sure we can all think of a time where this has happened in our own lives, whether it be intentional or unintentional. People don't really like to hear the truth. And that's what the freedom of ideals and ideas helps to portray. The case for freedom and deviancy, the free exchange of ideas, is very rooted in all of human history. Just kind of focusing in on American society in particular, John Brown, with the abolitionist movement, slavery. I mean, if we hadn't had deviancy and with people thinking what was right and what was wrong, and the free exchange of those ideas, we wouldn't be where we are as a country today. Things would be very bad, worse than they are. The founding fathers were considered deviants, and in particular, dangerous deviants to the British monarchy. And their deviancy actually led them to another sociological category, which is a state of rebellion against social nature, because the British monarchy failed to fulfill their end of the social contract. We see this with Rosa Parks, MLK, and the civil rights movement. Even all the way into my final example on the timeline well, second to last, with the dissolution of the Soviet Union, dissidents groups and deviant groups within communist society, such as the Velvet Revolution in Czechoslovakia and across occupied Eastern Europe. So the point with all of that is to really highlight the necessity of free speech. Not only free speech, but the free exchange of ideas. Not everyone's going to agree. That's just human nature. We are all entitled to the God-given right to have a different opinion. We don't have to always be right. We don't always have to be wrong. It's our opinion. A society grows healthy and prosperous from the free exchange of these ideas. I think more and more often, especially in American society, we're seeing a hyperpolarization of the whole country, where it's getting really bad. Even within parties, for example, the dissidents. Let's see, even within parties, for example, if you oppose our current president within the Republican Party, you're labeled as a deviant. Thomas Massey, he's been ostracized from the party. This isn't even just aimed at the Republican Party, because the Democratic Party and progressive ideology has done the same thing. So society doesn't progress unless we're able to sit down and have a conversation. All progress across every single era of human history has been achieved by social deviance. So instead of declaring war on social deviance and those who we deem dangerous, not patriotic, all of these different labels which are used to single out these groups, we need to sit down and have conversations. That's the long-winded answer for today's thing. Students in particular. This is very relevant towards students because we see a lot of problems propping up on campuses across the country, across the world, really. This isn't a uniquely American ideology. People do not want to tolerate beliefs that are differing than their own. Hate speech laws, for example, especially hate speech regulations on campus, have been statistically shown. I'll include the statistics at the end, but statistically shown where typically these rules and regulations actually end up harming the exact groups they are supposed to serve. The ultimate thing to take away from that is the status quo is the only group that will ever benefit from regulating speech. There's always going to be deviance against the status quo, and anything that deviates from the status quo is a inherent threat to their power and authority. So it's a inherently anti-democratic and anti-free social perspective to cancel out ideas that we don't believe in. My quote for the end of my presentation, as you all see, the truth is treason in an empire of lies. Ron Paul is the first person I heard this quote from. It's originally, I'm not 100% sure, it's originally based off of something that George Orwell laid out, the principles that he laid out in 1984. and it is absolutely accurate and applicable to today. If we want progress, if we want change, if we want a de-escalation of the tension that we feel in every aspect of our society, our schools, our schools, our work, our communities, we've got to sit down and we've got to have a conversation and learn how to talk again. Um, with that, that essentially concludes my presentation. Um, like I said, I'm a student at Arizona State University. I've got my contact information listed below if anyone is interested in contacting me. I am trying to further my academic participation and really kind of develop some projects. So if anyone's wanting to work on papers, anything like that, I'm definitely interested. And I am a member of Students for Liberty as well. There may actually be some overlap with this conference and their goals, potentially for some collaboration in the future. But if anyone's interested in that group, if anyone's interested in getting in touch with me, feel free to scan the QR code and feel free to email me. Thank you.
Constantinos, thank you so much. And we have a number of people applauding. We are now going to see if are there any questions for Konstantinos? Brief questions. Any brief questions for Konstantinos? Okay, let us see if we can bring Emmanuel Gilbert into the meeting. See if we can bring Emmanuel, which will be the final talk. Emmanuel is a student at the University of Northern Iowa. He's a graduate. My messages are not reaching him. Ricardo, are you able to send him a message?
By email?
Yeah,
Okay, I will send him.
thank you.
Because he's already here, but he's not answering. He's in the panelist section.
I see him, yeah, but he's not. I give him several different invites. Okay, while we're trying to do that, just remember, people, that I repeat this from our last meeting. Every Congress speaker will receive a recommendation on LinkedIn if you are on LinkedIn from me, while every participant will receive a certificate of participation. The North American Educational Initiatives Foundation hopes that participants will use these forms of recognition to enhance their graduate school applications and their college forms, as well as for job applications. Please, if we do not have your LinkedIn connection, you can reach me at Ted Wills MBA on LinkedIn. And I guess that we are going to conclude. This has been a very, very successful meeting. And what we're going to do with these talks, which were wonderful, wonderful talks, is we're going to make them into newsletters. As you're aware, the foundation is going to take each talk and make it into a newsletter that we might put out every 2 weeks or whatever and circulate publicly. And I think it'll be a wonderful way for you all to have exposure. Do I have the people still in the meeting? Do you want to turn on your audio and contribute any ideas for those people who are still in the meeting?
Well, I would like to say just thank you so very much for all the presentations, all the information provided here, and all the commitment towards this meeting. Appreciate it.
Iram, I want you to write to me at president@naeif.org so we can have all your contact information.
Yeah, I believe I sent you yesterday,
Yesterday?
I believe
Okay.
an email. Yeah, Theodore Williams, right? That's your email, correct?
Yeah, it's
president.at.naive.org.
exactly. Good.
Thank you.
And Konstantinos, we want to thank you very much. I think you've been able to give a lot of awesome questions. Patrick, do you have any final comments?
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
But I don't know. Thank you everybody for participating. It was a great experience from each and every one of us. We keep going. This is a way to learn, discover things, discover one another. Thank you for participating, and then I ask you to keep on researching. Education is the key. Thank you. Thank you,
Patrick,
President, for having us as well today.
I'm sorry I had to stop your talk, but I do want your talk, okay?
Yes.
I want it. Do you have it in the form of what form do you have that talk? Something you can send me?
Yes, I can send you like the PowerPoint letter.
Excellent.
From me.
Excellent.
Yeah, I can send it to you. Have it.
And Sergio, I already have your talk, or did you make it longer? So very good. We will be communicating with everyone, and thank you very much for such an outstanding Congress. It's really unbelievable, way beyond my expectations. Thank you so much. Congratulations.